What is going on, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, basketball watchers around the world? Welcome to From Half Court for today, October 30th. I am Sean Murphy, alongside, per usual, the Indiana man himself, Mr. Hoosier, Troy Sergey. Troy, it's good to see you as always, my friend. How are you doing today? How has it been now that basketball is unequivocally back?
It feels great, Sean. A lot of games this past week been able to watch. I think most teams have played 4 games now. Some teams have still
Yep.
played 3, but it's been a great start of the year so far. We have a lot of talking points to hit on, especially with our Pistons. But it's just great to be back in that NBA rhythm of watching games each and every night.
Yeah, absolutely. As fun as the off season is, like the projections, like the hypotheticals, nothing beats the real thing, and nothing beats the night to night drama that is the National Basketball Association. Also joining us today, a special friend of the podcast, a special friend of mine. He is one of my favorite NBA draft experts, but also covers the Detroit Pistons, does great work at the Resball Pod. You can follow him on social media at Resball Pod. It's my guy, Steve. Steve, my friend, it's so good to see you. How are you doing? What's Joe on the phone for today?
Oh, Joe is on the phone for wondering what happened in free agent. He's trying to get some more free agents to, actually come here to Detroit and get on
Trying
the
to get
phone
another
and do
2 years on
he's trying
Tobias?
to fill he's trying to fill that last, roster spot and the cap space they still have. He's on the phone. His computer's still not working. I think he drank both of those coffees back there, a little bit of
Yep.
tea in the porcelain there. And he's wondering, why is this landline not working?
Yeah, why does he have 2 thermoses and a teacup? I just realized that now. Joe, Joe, this is a little unpractical. But anyway, no, Steve, in all seriousness, it's so good to have you back, man.
Yeah, same. I'm always happy to be on the show. So ready to talk NBA draft. I mean, the Pistons are 0-4. We're ready to talk NBA draft.
Oh yeah, nothing says time to talk draft quite like 4 games into the season. No, but we do have a lot to talk about, Detroit Pistons. I definitely want to hear at least a little bit about your thoughts about this upcoming draft at some point. But this is From Half Court, where we talk all things Pistons basketball, NBA basketball, basketball as a whole. If you like that, make sure you like the video down below, subscribe to the channel so you're not missing any of the content, including live reactions after games. Trying to do as many of those as I can this year. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks to those who have been coming in and joining the live chat for those. You can also follow us on social media so you're not missing any of the coverage and up-to-date news. You can follow me at Sean Half Court. You can follow Troy at Troy3044, and go check out the Resball Pod and follow Steve at Resball Pod. But guys, let's talk about it. It has already been said the Detroit Pistons have started the season 0-4. They have played according, like when looking at the strength of schedule, they did start with the toughest strength of schedule, including 3 of the 4 finalists in the Eastern Conference from this last season, as well as the Miami Heat, which is another team that routinely makes deep runs in the playoffs. So to throw it out there, it's not like we're losing against the Washington Wizards or the Utah Jazz. Like it's not, I wouldn't say it's that like DEFCON 20 where all the alarms are going off. However, I do think that in this small sample size, I think we've seen exactly where this group has grown, where this group still needs to grow, and which players they need that production from to take those next steps. So, Troy, I'll start with you real quick. What have been your impressions of the Pistons thus far through the first 4 games?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll start with the negative. I certainly think this team is still really struggling to find a defensive identity. You look at some of the guys that we have on the court. I think of Tim Hardaway Jr. I think we were impressed with the last couple of games since we recorded last, Sean, about how much he's able to impact the team on the offensive end, as how he's able to score at will at times and really show some great flashes. But on the defensive end, my goodness, he's a liability. And Tobias Harris at times too. I think he's a guy that we knew what we were getting out of him this season, but I would have liked to see a little more production on both sides of the court, especially that defensive end. But some of the things I like, you can tell both Cade and Ivy have taken big steps since last season, and that's really exciting to see. Jalen Duren, I would have liked to have 4 games in seen a little more improvement on both sides of the court, but he's a guy that he's still young. I still am high on the guy, but I don't know if our alarm should be going off 4 games in, but I would have liked to have seen a little more production out of Jalen Duren. But again, Malik Beasley, a great guy addition that you had on this roster. We were able to see what he was able to do in Milwaukee, playing behind. Obviously, he didn't get quite the spotlight like a Damian Lillard or a Giannis or a Chris Middleton, but he was able to have some very high productive scoring nights in Milwaukee too, and we've seen flashes of that already, even a couple of games into this season. So, yeah, a lot to talk about, a lot to still think about, but those were the quick 1 minute or less takes of what I've been able to see the past couple of games.
Troy, I thought that was outstanding analysis. Steve, my friend, what about you? Well, on your Steve alarm meter, on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you say your panic level is at this present time for the Pistons?
I don't know about like panic because both Andy and I, so shout out to Andy, my co-host on the Pistons pod for the Resball pod. You can follow him on Twitter at D_Piston_fan. Does fantastic work. Always releases lineup data at the end.
We need some more underscores in there. Anyway.
I know, right? shout out Andy. Yeah, we were both like, I still think this is like 25 win team if everything goes right. So in terms of like panic meter, probably still pretty low because we expected this. But there are a few things of like, oof, this is still really bad. Number one, just being the center position in general, like Troy was saying about Duren. Duren, if you go look at the defensive tracking stats, and I know it's small sample size, we'll see how it is, but the consistent thing I've seen Duren with this is, man, he cannot guard in space on the perimeter. Miles Turner cooked him in that first game. He scored 14 points in 3 minutes during a stretch where Duren was guarding him and got cooked. Al Horford in that first quarter of that Celtics game, he just did whatever he wanted because Duren wasn't guarding him good enough from the perimeter. And again, if you look at the defensive tracking stats, right now Duren's allowing the guy he's defending to shoot 50% on 3-pointers. Gigantic problem. But part of it also is, like I said, the center position in general. I have no idea what they're doing with Beef Stew anymore, to be quite honest. Like, I have no idea what he is on offense. Apparently, they're not letting him shoot the ball. I need Corey Woods. I need Brandon Dent. I need Mike Curtis. I need any of those beat reporters, Eric Vincent, any of the guys that are in that media room. Sean, you're in there occasionally. I need one of y'all to ask JB point blank, why is Isaiah Stewart not shooting threes anymore? Like, is he not wanting to do it? Is that just something schematically they don't want to do anymore? Because Isaiah Stewart's averaging 2.5 points per game right now. And by the way, the center position is a gigantic problem because Jalen Duren has a turnover rate of 16% while only having a usage rate of 11.3. And Isaiah Stewart has a turnover rate of 50.3%. That's not 15. That is 50.3%. If it's over 20%, it's bad. If a turnover rate's over 30%, it's terrible. I don't even have words to tell you like how bad 50.9% is. And you've seen so many people. Yeah, you've seen so many people on Twitter, on like actual basketball analysis shows online talk about, man, I don't know about this guy's hands. He's fumbled a bunch of passes. So the center position in general, just Duren on defense, Stew on offense, it just seems like they don't really emphasize that position for whatever reason. But on the positive side of things, Cade and Ivy look like the man. Cade just seems like he'll go off in these tears. That Heat game, it seemed like he was never going to miss for a while. Just the moves he's been able to pull out in isolation situations, the fact he gets hot from 3 at times. And Ivy last night shot them back into the game pretty much. Cade and Ivy did, but Ivy's 3-point shooting in particular, because he wasn't getting any calls in that Heat game, man. They were mugging him all night going down the lane. And there was about 3 times where he was like, come on. And then by the fourth quarter, he was like, forget it. We need to get back into this. I'm just going to shoot the rock, and ended up going 5 for 9. And one of the things that I said in the preseason, because we released an episode maybe in like August saying like Cade and Ivy already do work together. And the main thing that Andy and I looked at was when Cade and Ivy shoot 5 or more threes, their percentages were better. They were shooting like 37%. Cade shot 38% whenever they shot 5 or more threes. And again, that game is proof positive that good things happen. Cade was 4 of 7 from three. Ivy was 5 of 9. That is one thing I would like to see more in the future. And we'll see how it goes, because it just seems like they shoot threes only when they're down in the fourth, and the rest of the game it doesn't seem to be a thing. But I mean, both guys, I have zero problem with their shot selections right now, and they're generating almost all of the offense because everybody else just seems like they're either a shooter or the dudes at the rim. So Cade and Ivy, like, they are doing so much. And man, yeah, I don't know. For somebody like me, Sean knows I was definitely like, I don't know about this Jaden Ivey guy. I was completely wrong, and I'm happy to be wrong about it. And Cade's still the man.
Yep. Yeah, I think you guys have, have touched on, a lot of really good stuff there. And I think a lot of, like what I've wanted to say, you guys have touched on really well. I would say, like most definitely when looking at, just like the areas of concern where this, like where this team needs to grow, right? I mean, I think you guys touched on it really well, of still needing more from their supporting cast, which is what you brought in, a Tobias Harris, a Malik Beasley, and a Tim Hardaway Jr. to do. I would say, like I would say from Beasley and Hardaway, I would say you've definitely seen those moments where they've shown their value, where they've shown like why they need that level of shooting. And I would say like there's moments where, that's really additive to, like what they're looking for, what they need. But at the same time, like for Tobias in particular, like he went like an entire 4-quarter stretch through the first 2 games of not even scoring a point. And even when he is, like scoring this year, albeit, it's, again, just, still throwing out the quantifier of it's 4 games, but he's shooting like 34% from the field. And that's just on the field. From the 3, he's not even shooting 20%. And, it's some of it is, some of it, like, you can start to see the age and the wear and tear, like the game in Cleveland, I believe, was actually his 900th career game. And so, like you can definitely see that a little bit, like when he's trying to, like when he's trying to create stuff off the dribble and when he's trying to drive past guys, like he just can't. Like that's just not, or at least he's not as good as he used to be. And especially in Miami when he was facing Jimmy Butler, when like when those guys are going against each other, you could visibly see, like he was just struggling to take care of the basketball. There were a lot of times where Jimmy was able to poke it out and like making that uncomfortable for him. So, at the very least, I think, like I think some of it is I think they need to be more realistic with what Tobias can do and not ask him to self create so much. I think a lot of it is, getting sets where, like you're giving him more open opportunities where you're getting him easier cuts to the basket. But on the other hand, as simple it is as simple as they just need him to hit those gimmies. They need him to hit those shots. And there were moments where like he was just missing gimmies, like layups at the rim, and it's one of those things where you don't want to like make any like wiping conclusions, but it's one of those things where that would definitely be a concern. And to your point with Isaiah Stewart, I would just really extend that to the entirety of the Pistons second unit. One of the things that, we talked about this team taking a leap, and one of the reasons why this would be a better team than last year was because on paper, this is a significantly better second unit than what the Pistons had last year, especially if you're staggering Jaden Ivey, especially if you're allowing those guys to, operate more in space, alongside the shooters that they have. Isaiah Stewart to be, like kind of that stable, like backup big, especially if they had him shooting threes and he was spacing the floor, it makes a lot of sense. But really, outside of Malik Beasley, they've gotten almost little to no scoring production thus far. And like with Simone Fontecchio, like I expect him to be able to get it going eventually. I know he had like a chaotic summer between like coming back from the injury and they had a child and had to like move to Detroit, all that stuff. Not making excuses, but it's like it's not particularly surprising. It's taking a second for him to get like his feet under him, but it's when that compounds with Isaiah Stewart and when that compounds with the other players that are coming off the bench. And Ron Holland, I mean, he's 19 years old. He's a rookie. There's moments where he looks really good, but realistically, if you're relying on him to consistently contribute offensively every single night, that's just not in a position where you're going to win a lot of games. So, all that to say, they really do need more from those ancillary pieces. But as awesome, like Cade Cunningham, there's moments where it's just like, oh, he's taking the leap and he's taking the leap right now. On the other hand, Cade said it himself, you can't turn over the ball 5+ times a game and not only expect to win, but even expect to be, like in that echelon of players. Like part of what makes some of these guards great is they do all of these things while taking care of the basketball, while not turning it over. And while I think some of that is not entirely on Cade, a good amount of it is. And at a certain point, there's just not an excuse. So, Troy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a good point there, especially about the turnovers, because we've been even saying that since really his rookie year in a lot of ways. That's always kind of been, if there's one weakness of Cade's game that you wanted to see improvements on, it would have been the turnovers. But yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't really think too hard about the scoring element, because I was happy with at least what we're getting out of Ivy and Cade, but you're right. You would certainly want more scoring production out of both your first and second unit. And like you said, Malik Beasley is a guy that we can rely on. That he's a proven player that can shoot the rock pretty solidly behind the arc. But you need to score the ball, to win some of these games too. And when you're struggling, when you know that there's defensive holes on your team's game, and you have a hard time at times having consistent scoring, it's a very, very difficult task to win against any NBA team.
Yeah, I mean, as JB said, like last night, it's like there's only so much you can do when you're not hitting your shots.
Yep.
And especially in that fourth quarter, like they just collapse. And I think another thing he said as well, and Steve, I'm not sure if you agree with this, but it's like a lot of times when I watch the Pistons in those first 3 quarters, they're almost a different basketball team than in the fourth, because there's an aggression there. Like you can see like the intensity, you can see that like they want to come out and turn around the narrative and to be better. But then on the flip side, you have those moments where you look at like a Jalen Duren or like some of these other guys, and it's just or like once you get to the fourth quarter, it's just like, oh, we're not playing to win, we're playing to not lose.
Yeah. So shout out to Jason at Trashman on Twitter. He's, talking about this too. He said, I'm not even joking around when I say this, but it feels like the Pistons as a team have this weird yips like thing about second half leads. It's like they failed so many times at holding those leads that they almost play that into existence every single night, losing culture. And then he gives us a shrug emoji. I thought I bookmarked this one. I thought I saw somebody else talking about 4 years. Some of these guys have been 4 years. Cade's been here at least 3 years. Like it happens so often that you just get this like, oh my gosh, I don't want this to happen again. And you get tensed up like that. But the other thing is there is a guy on this team who's a 13-year veteran who scored a lot of points. I like Tobias as a dude and the player that he was before this year. Like that's fine. That would have been good and fill in the gaps. And to his credit, I do think there have been times where he's taken more threes than he has in the past, which is my main criticism of him, and where I was like, oh, I don't know if this is going to work if he's not going to. And there have been times where like JB and the staff have started him in the corners, and Cade and Ivy have hit him in the corners for open corner 3-point looks, which he should succeed at, but he just hasn't so far.
Yep.
I think that's where I'm just at, is like, I already think like 25 win team, but if Tobias looks like the Tobias that's been, and again, he's taking more threes than he usually does. His 3-point attempt rate right now is 38.6%. That's good. If it's 38 to like 40% of his shots come from three, it will help out a lot, Cade and Ivy in particular. Then it's like, okay, I think we'll maybe start to see things where we don't get a 19-point fourth quarter and everything is so bogged down in that area. Also, the play calling to me, like, again, I'm just some dude. I don't really like criticizing NBA coaches who obviously have way more experience and everything than me.
Right.
But like in that Boston game, the momentum was killed by them going to, Tobias in the elbows. And then he threw the high elbows and that murdered the momentum. And then again, in the Heat game, same thing. It's just like, I don't see how that helps Cade and Ivy, number one.
Right.
I just think it's one of those things where it's like, if you got your guys rolling, and the Boston game too, like Fontecchio and Beasley were on fire. It's like, just let them roll with it, man. So I think it's a little combination of everything, right? Of like,
yeah,
when you've been in those spots before, like that's stuck in your mind, it's hard to shake it. Number two, Tobias just right now is a gigantic cold streak. Cross your fingers, he doesn't stay in it. I
Yep.
don't really think he'll stay in it. And then the last part of it is just like the play calling at times so far has been questionable, to
Yep.
say the least.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with a lot of that as well. And I think when people were talking last year about like going into this season about there's no way that this Pistons team is not going to reach 30 wins, or there's no reason when you look at this collection of players in this roster, like if you're just talking about, on paper, I agree with that sentiment. But Troy, what's something I used to say all the damn time?
Basketball is not played on paper.
And the reality
And
of it is,
and you say that the only thing. Actually, I forgot. Go ahead. Go say it.
yeah, Troy, I was so proud of you for a second. No, I'm kidding. But anyway, like, no, you're absolutely spot on. Like, basketball is played on paper, and like when you talk about what the Pistons went through like last season, I think it's a little premature to just presume that that's not going to have an impact on this team, or like that's not just something that they can shake. And like I think like this kind of yips, or almost like this like collective trauma, is kind of exactly like that's exactly like the prime example of it, right? So I think the problem, like the real concern would be, is if we're having the same conversation 25 games in or 35 games in. Like I think that's where it's like, like this is where they're at now, but the job of the coaching staff and of the front office is to help and cultivate a group that can grow out of that. And I think that kind of leans into my next question is, how long of a leash do you guys think this group has? Because, the front office has talked about, like wanting to be patient, doing this the right way. They're not necessarily focused on wins and losses. However, if I'm Trajan Langdon, if I'm JB Bickerstaff, one of the things that you probably talk about as a collective is, we can't let last year get off the rails nearly the same as it did last year.
Yeah.
And like, as of recording, it sounds like there's going to be no Paul George. There's going to be no, like Joel Embiid in Philly. So on paper, that should be a very winnable game. But if it starts to spiral and this gets close to a double digit losing streak, at what point does Trajan start to pick up the phone? Like,
Right.
so I'm curious, just from your standpoint, Troy, just,
Yeah.
I would think this would probably at least have a couple of months, and realistically, a lot of teams are not going to want to be making moves until a decent portion of the season anyway. But it's like, how long of a leash do you think this group has, given that
Right.
there's a new coaching staff and new front office?
Right. It's kind of a tough question because you have to ask yourself of what exactly is an alarm. Because even 20 games in, if you're at 20 games in and you're 6-14, to me that's a big alarm right there. But if you're 20 games in and you're 6-14, but maybe let's say 8 out of those 14 losses were within 5 points, that's a totally different story, I guess. But you certainly want to see big tremendous leaps this season, like we've talked about all off season, right, getting ready for this season. So I'm gonna say between 20 and 25 games.
Yeah, I think I think that's a pretty fair range. What about you, Steve? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, the Monty season should be a learning lesson for all of us. 20 to 30 games is enough to know like who you are as an
Yeah.
organization. Because I remember 20 to 30 games, we were still like, yeah, I don't know, like they'll get out of this. When it should have been like, oh yeah, the whole benching Ivy thing, forcing Killian, all those weird things that we just kind of were like, maybe we'll get out of it. Like we're, you know, telling you who Monty was and why it got so bad. Then 20 to 30 games, I think, is where hopefully Trajan has set to of like, okay, we get an idea. And I remember in the off season, JB even said that by 20 to 30 games, you should know what our identity is. You should know what we're running and everything. So he's even said it beforehand. And to Troy's point about like, what do they look like? That's always a hard thing, right? Like you can look like a functional offense and it's like the shooters just start knocking them down or whatever. But
Yep.
if it continues this way, where like Beasley and THJ are kind of the interchangeable shooter that can't knock down 2-point shots, and then Tobias continues to struggle, and then the center position is what it is, then it's like, yeah, you got to start doing something. Because I've made the point on my pod, and the most recent podcast that Andy and I dropped are everybody not named Kate Cunningham on this Piston team is playing for their job, which I 100% believe because it's a new president of basketball operations. When you bring in a new whole front office, what do they normally do? They get out the guys that were associated with the previous regime, and then they bring in their guys. I don't think Trajan's really brought in his guys so far. And if by 20 to 30 games it still looks that bad, then like of course he has every right to bring in his new guys. I definitely believe though Ivy and Kate are keepers, and everybody else it seems so far is like it'll be up in the air.
Yeah, I would probably say that the organization would view Ron Holland in that group as well, just because that is one of their, that is their pick.
Yeah,
Um,
but at the same time, if like Trey Murphy became available, or
of
if
course,
somebody
of
that's like
course.
such a perfect fit, then you're like, okay, we got to do it.
Of course. Yeah, I think they really like Asar Thompson as well, but at the same time, that's just hard to gauge just because of where he's at. And listen, I think if you throw in Asar Thompson in there, I think this team looks different. I think in a lot of ways, like they probably look improved in that second unit. I still, I think a lot of this team and like where they can potentially go, I still want to see Ron Holland and Asar Thompson on the court together. And I know, especially from a jump shot standpoint, from day one, that's probably, especially from spacing, that's
Just
probably
don't play
going to
them
be
with Duran, please.
right. Like you're going to have to be very wise about the minutes you do that. You're not going to be able to do it for long stretches of time. However, the potential of those guys defensively about how they could potentially hound guys. Because if there's any area I've been extremely impressed with Ron Holland with his start, it's his competitive intensity and it's his intangibles defensively. Like is he this amazing NBA player out of the package day one? Absolutely not. No, I'm not, and I'm not claiming, but I do think if you look at like what the Pistons got and what he can potentially be, I think there's reason to be pretty happy with their pick.
Can I tell you my favorite Ron Holland moment so far?
Yes.
So in the Cleveland game, George Niang does that thing where he runs up behind him to get a little cheap shot in the back, right? Ron immediately picks up his dribble and is like, "Stop doing that." It gets in his face, and
Yep.
the fight starts to break out. And I've said for a long time what this team needs is a sheed. I do think Ron has a lot of that type of attitude. Again, 19 years
Yep.
old, you'd think he would be like, I'm shutting my mouth, but he does not care. You saw him kind of going back and forth with Jimmy Butler in the Heat game. Like he has that kind of attitude. It's just like the offensive skills are going to come around, and he's like the wrecking ball type of player where you just throw him out there and he messes up the offense and does a lot
Yep.
of small hustle things that this team needs at every position.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Troy, what's been your impression of Ron Holland thus far?
Yeah, I actually think he certainly exceeds our expectations. We knew that he is an athletic wing, right? We knew that he has all the athletic intangibles to make him, a solid NBA player. But I mean, in the minutes that we saw, especially even that first game against Indiana, he was really competing. He was hustling. He was running on both sides of the court. He was fast. He was getting to the hole. And I think, with a guy that you pick at 5 in this draft, I think that's a great fit for this team.
Yep.
4 games in, there's no way that we can have a full assessment of what he's going to be looking like for the remainder of the seasons. But I think he is certainly exceeding my expectations. I knew that he'd be athletic. I knew that he had some good intangibles, but I think he's out there really playing high competitive basketball from day one. And I
Yep.
wasn't sure if he would adjust to the NBA game right away in the way that he's doing. Of hey, we need you to play competitive basketball, and he's going out and doing that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and if I can interject one more time here, my comp for Ron Holland at the end of the whole draft process was Crash Gerald Wallace. Gerald Wallace didn't really do anything until like year 3 or 4. It took him a while, and his main thing was his nickname was Crash. You know what's going on there, messing things
Crossing
up on the
boards.
defense
Yeah.
and being able to get in there and generate free throws, which I think Ron can do. Another name to think of associated with Trajan Langdon is Dyson Daniels. Again,
Yes.
Dyson Daniels' first 2 years in the league, like under 6 points per game, under 32% from three. Everybody's like, ugh, I don't know about this. Kind of stuck in between positions, and then goes to Atlanta and blossoms in the role. Hopefully, it'll keep up. But I think Ron's like you can think of in those terms too. Maybe this year, like, not going to set the world on fire. Maybe even next year, not going to set the world on fire. But by year 3, I think he's going to figure it out, and the Pistons will figure out what to do with him.
By the way, I got to give Atlanta some credit pretty quickly, not to go completely off topic, but I gave them a lot of over the years just about how they're rudderless as an organization. And, like with Trey Young at the, at the helm, I just don't think they're really going to do much of anything, and how fluky their Eastern Conference Finals run is. Maybe I'm still hating on them right now. What I'm really trying to say is they do deserve credit for the move that they made, and what they got back for DeJounte Murray. Like you said, I love Dyson Daniels. I'm a big fan of his. And now you can throw him next to, like a Trey Young, but also, I'll say this too. Zachary Risachet, that dude can play. And I did not expect to say those words ever, let alone in the first 4 games of the season. So throw that alongside, like, Jalen Johnson and what they have cooking. Atlanta actually looks pretty interesting going forward. So that's just something to monitor and keep an eye on. But one thing, like just touching, I know we've, alluded to it a little bit and talked about it slightly. The one thing, like with Cade Cunningham, we all, we all know like how special he is, but like when you look at the turnover numbers, like it's like this is a regression thus far through the first 4 games. Like this is almost like to his levels of when he was in his rookie year. And according to Cleaning the Glass, he's in the 7th percentile in the NBA in turnovers right now, and in the 100th percentile of usage. So he has the ball a lot, but he's turning, and maybe part of that is just how high his turnover or how high his usage rate is. Maybe a lot of it is just, like some slight over reliance. But Steve, like when you're watching the game, like what do you see as far as like his like just his turnover issue? Like how much of it do you think is forced? How much of it do you think is mistakes being made by other teammates? Like what are you seeing?
Number one, look at anybody that has over 30% usage rate, which Cage does right now at 33.6% usage. Like think Luca, think Jokic, think a young LeBron James, Trey Young. Like they're all going to have high turnover rate. And I know, like looking at the numbers per game, Cade has 5.8 turnovers per game, which is high, and the turnover rate 19.7%. Honestly, that's not that bad because his assist percentage was 39.5%, and that went down because when we pulled the numbers after the fourth game or the third game, excuse me, it was 40.5%. And I honestly gonna think it's gonna be in that level. Last year he ended up with 37.5% assist percentage. You know who he tied with? He tied for somebody 5th in the NBA last year with 37.5% assist percentage. Any idea who that person was? Cade Cunningham tied with.
Luca?
Tyrese Halliburton?
LeBron James. So if you want to know
Okay.
how good of a playmaker Cade Cunningham is, there you go. And again,
Is that
it
good?
seems like
I
that.
heard that's good.
He only leads like the NBA all time in points, right? So, yeah, pretty good. Again, but I will say this: I forget who pointed it out on Twitter because I've thought the same thing. They tweeted out Cade makes this pass every game where he's at like on the wing and he tries to bounce pass it through 2 defenders into the
Yes.
paint, and it always ends up in a turnover. Again, I joked on the pod. If I'm his teammate, if I'm his coach, if I'm his trainer, if I'm his baby mama, I'm like, dude, stop doing that. It never works. Stop doing that. I know you were really good at passing, but bro, like I can spend an afternoon getting the clips of you trying it and not working. There are like 1 or 2 passes that he likes to bust out that he should not. And I really think, like, again, think about it, instead of 5.8 turnovers, it's 3.8. And again, it's probably those like 2 dumb passes he makes every game. But it's also that line of like, what else is he supposed to do, right? Like nobody else is
Right.
scoring the ball. And Ivy to go over in Ivy's side too, 9.9% turnover rate. Like he is not turning the ball over, and that went up from the third game where it was 6.7.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is just responsibility. Ivy does have 26.1% usage, so it's still like one of the primary creators. But the difference between the two of like, Cade, we want you to create all the offense while also like generate the assists that the shooters need, try and get Tobias involved, do all the off-ball stuff with Ivy. I think it's just more responsibility with the caveat that like, yeah, you got to stop doing those 1 or 2 that just never work, man.
Yeah. It's almost kind of like Brett Favre sometimes, where it's like where like you watch him play.
Don't you dare spoil Cade Cunningham's name. You're a Michigander. How dare you?
You're right. Brett Favre. It's almost like watching Jordan Love play, where it's
Matthew Stafford.
Yeah,
How about
yeah.
that one?
Okay, there we go. Matthew Stafford, where it's like where you watch him make some plays and he does some things that wows you, but like a couple times per afternoon, you're just going to see a throw. And the only thing that you're going to ask yourself is, what the hell was that? And I would say that's just some of Cade's passes once in a while. To your point, like James Harden, I think, is one of the highest turnover rates in the history of basketball.
Okay.
Like a lot of guys who are heliocentric, have the ball in their hands a lot, are very, like that's just going to be a thing. I will say Luka Doncic, that is actually something he's been, for his usage rate, he's actually been pretty damn good with taking care of the basketball. I'm not saying, I mean, it's a really high bar. So when you're comparing someone to Luka, like that's pretty unfair in a lot of ways. But at the same time, I mean, at the very least, it paints a picture of kind of where that gap exists between those types of players. Now, I would say perhaps the most positive development for the Pistons thus far has to be Jaden Ivey. Just because, you just look at his skill set, the things that he brings to the table. Like, we all knew Jaden Ivey had everything it took to be an NBA player. It's just for those things to actually click. And again, 4 games, things could change, but his jump shot, he looks really comfortable. He was really comfortable in the preseason as well. He's shooting 45% from 3 this year, which that's not sustainable. But if he can shoot high 30s, low 40s, I think that's, really good shooting percentage for him. And the other thing as well is he looks like he's getting better, around the rim. Like, he's still, he's still in the 33rd percentile in field goal percentage around the rim. So there's still, obviously a lot of growth for him in that area still. But I'll say this much. I mean, he looks like a lot. It looks like a lot of things are starting to click. And if this is how he looks at the beginning of the season, I'm really intrigued to see how he looks by game 82. So, Steve, I know you kind of already said something of, oh, I was a little wrong about Ivy. What are the things you're seeing from him that you maybe didn't expect, or that you were like, what were the things that you were worried wouldn't quite translate the way that they have?
Number one, the jumper. I hated his jumper coming out of Purdue because instead of using his guide hand to steady the ball, he was using it to generate more thrust. He wasn't doing it. And I know people are crediting Fred Vincent for like helping him. No, it's all on Ivy. I've
He's been
tracked
here for
Ivy
like a
since his
month. He
time.
can't do that much for.
Yeah, I tracked Ivy every single offseason. I remember last offseason seeing him in those Rico Hine runs and seeing the arc that he got out of it, and the hand was a little bit more, the offhand was a little bit more steady and stopped generating thrust. And this offseason, when I saw him working at Demetrius Jackson's camp, I was like, oh man, that offhand is not involved at all. And then the preseason kicked in, and again, bam, you see the results. I
Yep.
also think his shot selection, somebody finally talked to him about his shot selection, where he is kind of eliminating the push shot, his floater-ish thing, and then not doing so much mid-range things. And the Celtic game and the Heat game are good examples. He's doing this nice trick to generate more free throws where he's jumping earlier than you would
Yep.
expect him to do. So he's like driving in and jumping like kind of midway between the free throw line and the restricted circle. And just anybody watch that Celtic game, you can kind of see defenders looking at each other like, I ain't jumping at him, I ain't jumping at him. Because then it puts you in this weird spot of like, oh, I can challenge a shot, but I'm probably going to get a hard foul call as a result. So he either gets a clean look at the rim or they get the foul call. And then maybe somebody like a Derek White, who's like an exceptional shot blocker, can't get in there and do that. And in the Heat game, he got mauled like 3 or 4 times. They're not calling anything. He's like,
Yep.
come on to the refs. And then in the fourth quarter, he's like, all right, forget it. Let's just start shooting the ball, and goes 5 of 9. So I think his shot selection is like incredibly improved.
Yep.
Defensively, I think too, he's improved. The Cleveland game is a really good example. Donovan Mitchell only shot 38.5% from the entire field in that game, mainly because Ivy was the primary defender. He went 1 of 8, I believe, from 3. Mitchell, that's his bread and butter, because Ivy didn't get shook and made him uncomfortable and forced him into tough makes.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, again, it's small sample size. Defensive field goal percentage for Ivy is 36.8% on threes, which is great. He's holding people like league average from 3, and as a perimeter defender and like the other guard defender next to K, that's what you want to happen. And also right now, he's allowing guys to shoot 47.1% on shots 6 feet or less. That's really good also. So the only areas where he's really struggling is like the 10 feet area, where he's letting guys shoot 47.1%. And then outside of 15 feet, he's letting guys shoot 45.8%. That's good. Like, okay, he's making guys average at 3. He's making them below average at the rim. And then the only things he's really giving up are those tough long twos, which, like, how many guys can actually do that. So again, who knows if it'll hold up the rest of the season, but I do want to give him his flowers because defensively was where I was like, this guy's like, no, not going to get it. I'm
Yeah.
always worried when you're blessed with physical, benefits. You have physical gifts over everybody else, but you can't capitalize on those physical gifts. And
Yep.
so far this season, it seems like he's doing it, and mainly through second effort stuff too. That's the big thing. I don't think he's dying on screens. I think he's making it tough for whoever he's guarding. Even if he's getting cooked, he's like, all right, forget it. Next possession, I'm down there. So yeah, not enough love for Ivy yet, but hopefully it'll hold up a whole season.
Yeah, and I mean, Troy, the other thing as well is the shooting percentage, like those things I think, like are very much like subject to, like we'll see a month from now where that's at. And we'll have a lot better of an idea of how he's actually doing in that category. But like I think certain things that you can look at and just go, "Oh, well, there's clearly already a leap there." I would just say his processing of the game. Like just mentally, like, you can just see that the reps that he's had is really slowed down. Like the game's really slowed down for him. And I think, like he's a guy that literally every coach that's had him at this point, every front office executive has all said the same thing. He literally, if anything, he works too hard. They almost have to tell him to get out of the gym at points. So for me, it's not really a surprise to see that it's starting to click. I think it's just the fact that it's clicking this well, this early.
Yeah, that's all great points, Sean. And I think, too, one thing Steve touched on, too, is the basketball IQ. I think that naturally comes after a couple of years in the league, and that high basketball IQ can then translate on the offensive end with better shot selection, smarter shots, not just, but also knowing the plays and knowing, where Cade and where other guys on the court need you to be at in order to create open shots for yourself. And not just open shots, but the ability to, drive to the hole and, make a good layup. We've seen that, this is his third year now, all the years he's been in the league, but especially seeing that now too. So I think, just knowing how the NBA game flows and knowing how he's able to score in the league and get to his own spots, I think we're seeing that 4 games in, and I look forward to continuing to watch that for the rest of the season.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, Steve, that's something that you said earlier. It's just, I think the questions of whether or not Cade and Ivy can play together, I think those can be put to rest. I think we've seen that their games can complement each other really well. I'd still love for it to feel a little less my turn, your turn at times. It still feels like those minutes when they are on the court together, they're still figuring out a little bit how to coexist. But I mean, there's far too many examples of teams having multiple guards or multiple guys who can create shots, off the dribble and the impact and the positive effect of that I think there's already a blueprint of this very much can work.
Yeah, I think JB had one last year.
Yeah, he had a pretty good one in Cleveland. Side note, I mean, I still can't believe a guy lost to the Boston Celtics and his record literally got better every single year, lost his job. But that's that's just the NBA in a nutshell. Literally 7 out of the 12 WNBA coaches got fired this offseason, I think. Like literally over half the league are coaches.
Yeah, shout out Teaspoon. I don't know what they were doing in Chicago for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I understand a little bit in Indiana because you have like a special thing you wanna capitalize on it, but even then, it's just like, man, you make this great run. Caitlin Clark helps and brings in this whole new energy. You make the playoffs, and boom, your coach is right out of there. What a brutal business. But
well, I mean, this guy behind me knows all about that.
Oh yeah, 100. Yeah, I mean, I think he's still trying to answer the call to process that he's no longer the Pistons president. I think someone still has to tell him that.
I think he wants to fire Michael Curry all over again.
Oh, don't even say that name in my presence.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Oh man. Well, looking throughout the rest of the league, I'm not sure about you guys. It's been, it feels like every season always has a ton of storylines. This one feels like it's most certainly no exception, especially, the biggest takeaway I've had thus far from this season, there's a couple of them, but the biggest one for me is I think Steve Kerr is about to get so much crap from GMs and coaches and people throughout the league this year because of the fire that he lit under the ass of Jason Tatum, but also, in a way, he helped light the fire under Jaylen Brown as well. Like, really? You took this historically great roster and then gave them motivation. like when they
Yeah.
just won the title. Like I'm not sure what your guys' thoughts are, but the way Jason Tatum is playing right now, it's if this level of production keeps up, I don't see how an MVP is not in his future.
Right, and I think that's a great observation because 4 games in, not only are they 4-0, but I mean they've been able to beat teams like
It's the
Milwaukee.
way they've done it
Right,
too.
right. Pretty single-handedly, like with ease. New York, even with bigger ease. I mean, Milwaukee kept it competitive, but I mean, I don't know if you watched that game last night, Sean, but it was like there was still no. You really didn't think that Milwaukee had any chance of winning, even when they went on some scoring runs throughout the game, because you just knew that this Boston Celtics team had the firepower, led by, the guy you just mentioned, Jason Tatum. So I think certainly, I mean, you put on Twitter, Sean, a couple of days ago. I don't know. I think this is a realistic that this team could possibly even win 70 games. I'm not sure if I want to make that take, but I think 60, absolutely. 65, absolutely.
I mean,
Certainly,
that's
I
where they
think.
were last year.
Right, yeah, I guess 60 over 65 then. I think certainly you look at their division, you look at a team like a New York Knicks team and Philadelphia 76ers team. I don't think they have any chance to catch up with them and to beat them in the division this year. I think the division belongs to the Boston Celtics, and not just the division. I think there's a strong argument you can even make 4 games in that this is certainly their conference to lose to. I think they have a high chance to win the conference. Even if a Cleveland or a Milwaukee does get things together, I still think this is Boston's team to lead the East again.
Yeah, and Steve, they're doing all this, and Kristaps Porzingis is just in street clothes,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the scary thing, is that the cherry on top hasn't even been brought out yet. We haven't even gotten the whipped cream on this pie yet.
I hate saying anything nice about Boston. Shout out Stacy, my best friend since like kindergarten. You grew up a Boston fan, so we were always back and forth. But I mean, yeah, they're great the way they built their team from top to bottom. I mean, like Sam Hauser is like their 10th guy. He would be starting for the Pistons if he was here, right? So it's bananas.
I've
But
wanted
I
Peyton
never
Pritchard
like
in a Pistons uniform for 3 years now, by the way, but that's a whole other conversation.
Fast PP. If you don't know that nickname, you know it now. So I don't know. It's hard too for me because it's such early on in the season, and I feel like ever since the KD Warriors got broken up, it's like we see this kind of every year where like this team goes on a run, they win the title, and then they come out the next year, guns blazing. Everybody's like, oh, they're going to repeat. And then they end up falling somewhere along the way just because of injury and wear and tear. Like it's reckless to depend on Kristaps made out of paper Porzingis. I mean, they got lucky that he was able to come back for the playoffs. Number one,
Yeah.
they're good without him, but I mean, I'm not sure they really won a title without him, to be honest. Like the stretchability and the rim protection, and then 38-year-old Al Horford, super consistent, but at some time, Father Time's going to catch up. And I'm only
Absolutely.
2 years older than Al, so I don't know how Al's knees are feeling. Mine aren't so hot anymore. Luke Cornett maybe though can step in because he's been like real legit, and I'm
Yep.
somebody that I wanted the Pistons to sign just for the rim protection in general. But I think Porzingis just like always pushes them over the edge, and if they don't have him, that's the part to me where I'm like really worried of like, oh man. And I don't know that the Drew Holiday thing is a like really worry, but like when he doesn't get hot, man, he really holds you back. Like that second after that year, after the Bucks didn't make it to the finals again, like he just shot like garbage. When he was with New Orleans, shot like garbage. So that's the other part of it, is like Drew can be up and down in the playoffs, but the great luxury to have. I can't relate right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty great when a Drew Holiday is not doing well, you have Derek White, and if White's not doing well, you have Jaylen Brown, you have Jason Tatum, and you have Peyton Pritchard, Sam Hauser, Luke Corn, they're like it's just
Shout out Xavier Tillman, big X over there, man.
Xavier
Still,
Tillman,
yeah, he's
yeah,
starting to come
MSU
up.
alum. Yeah, like playing playing well in his role over there. And I think that's the big thing, is they're also really good at finding opportunities to get guys rest. And it's that comment that Jaylen Brown made of playing teams like the Pistons where they could feed Peyton Pritchard that night. I know Pistons fans hate to hear it, but he's right. Like
Yeah.
like he can only
It
say it
happened too.
because,
It happened. They
right.
had PP problems in Boston.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. They come into Detroit with big PP energy, and then It's just, all over the court. But anyway, thanks a lot for bringing that into the equation, Steve. Right now I'm gonna have to
I just
think
need
like a
him and Grady
12-year-old.
Dick to be on a team now, and then my world is complete.
I forgot which players. It was Grady Dick, and I forgot the player he took a picture with.
Anthony
Anthony
Black.
Black.
Anthony
Oh
Black.
yes, 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 that's right. That picture just blew up Twitter.
And
That was
the
he
smirks
understood the
on both
assignment.
the smirks on both of their faces taking that picture was priceless.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of Orlando, speaking of Anthony Black, hit a really good shot against the Pacers last night to seal the victory. But the thing that was even more impressive, and just talking about like one of my like now just like one I was already like very interested in what this team would do this year, but the way Paolo Banchero's looked through the
Yeah.
first week is just, I mean, there's been a lot of comparisons made, like, when he was coming out of college, or a lot of like Carmelo Anthony type of comparisons. I think last year, there were like, like as or like the last couple of years, as he showcased his athleticism and some of the things he can do, around the rim. I think a lot of people, like started to say like Blake Griffin. I don't like to throw this comparison out a lot, but I just think it's unavoidable. He's starting to look more like LeBron every single day. And like if you want to see the, just like that fully played out, it's that Pacers first half where it wasn't just the 37 points that he scored. It was the 8 rebounds. It was the 6 assists. He was involved in every single aspect of what they were doing. And there wasn't a single thing in the world that the Pacers could do to stop it. I know the Pacers are not a good defensive team, so it's not exactly, like they went up against like, the '04 Pistons in that regard, but I mean, Paulo, regardless of who that team was, it looked like he was going to make them look like toddlers that night. And so, Orlando already was coming off of, a great season last year, a massive jump. If they're getting this Paulo, like, like just this self-assured, more dynamic Paulo Banchero, their window might be open a lot sooner than people thought.
Right, right. And you look at all the talents that have come in the league the past decade or 2 decades, like you mentioned, a LeBron, and players who have this good of starts in year 3, Sean, and are taking this big of leaps, only continue to make bigger leaps throughout years 4 and 5 and become truly some of the best players in the league. And when you are one of the best players in the league, no matter what, I guess I shouldn't say no matter what, but 99% of the time, you instantly like that make the team that you're on a contender. And when you look
Mhm.
at the East right now, we certainly know this is Boston's conference right now to be running, at least for the foreseeable future. But you see a team like Orlando, if they're able to even put some more pieces around. We still talk about Suggs last week of how well he's been playing last season and even the first couple games this season. You look at Franz Wagner. This Orlando team is legit, and they really should have beaten that Cleveland Cavaliers team in Game 7. They had a double-digit lead around the second half in that
Yep.
Game 7 in the first round. So easily that team already could be a second-round team. And then you take this leap with Paulo. This team in the near future really could be up there competing for the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, I think, with, especially if the Knicks are fully healthy, I still think the Celtics and the Knicks are probably, your Eastern Conference Finals matchup. But if I'm Philadelphia, if I'm Cleveland, if I'm New York, if I'm Boston, if I'm any of these, Eastern Conference teams with legitimate aspirations, the last team I want to face as currently constructed in the playoffs is Orlando because of their youth, because of their confidence. They are playing with house money. They really are. And, Steve, I know Jalen Suggs is a prospect that, was looked at as a bust initially. I know there's guys on this team that, people weren't necessarily, like the highest on coming out of college. But I mean, I think Orlando, when you look at their drafting, when you look at their player development over the last couple of seasons, they're right up there with the best in the league.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to get on my soapbox for a minute. Anybody out there in the draft space never buy into the like, oh, this is a bad year. Oh, no, there's no like number one consensus overall. That's all we heard for that 2022 draft. And people were like gave you the yeah, but with Paulo. Yeah, he's the number one player, but nah, he doesn't shoot threes. I don't know about defense. And like
Yeah.
everybody seemed kind of like less enthused about that draft. And I know a lot of people went into it too, thinking Chet was the number one guy. And Chet's played fantastic. Chet's been amazing. But Paulo's just been on another level, on another tear. Never take any draft class for granted because there's always somebody that rises up and ends up being really good. Like the 2000 draft is probably the only one that didn't really warrant like an all-star superstar type of a player. And even that one gave us Jamal Crawford, like one of the best ball handlers and six man of all time. There's always somebody that rises through there. And I was somebody that the minute I saw Paulo, I was like, yeah, it's like Carmelo. I always kind of rank guys as to like, how do I put the board together? And at the top is always like, okay, who's like the guy you see and you're like, okay, they're the primary shot creator. Like they're just going to generate offense like nothing. Are they going to be a defensive anchor like you see them and they affect every facet on the court? Like Cooper Flag is a good example this year. Like he's absolutely a defensive anchor, or it doesn't matter what position he's playing, he's affecting the entire defense.
Yep.
Whereas Paulo is what I call like a size and skill prospect, where you're like, you don't see guys at that size with that level of skill. It just doesn't happen. Giannis is a good example of this. And he just that's his game. He's so super skilled. He's a technician. He knows how to get better at everything. He knows what the weaknesses of his game are. He
Yep.
knows he couldn't shoot threes. He got better last year. It looks like he's a sniper this year. He continues to crash the glass, over 6 assists, 28.5 points per game right now. And the funny part about it too is you're like, yeah, I can see him doing this across a full season. You talk about Tatum like in future MVP consideration. Like I think Paulo's starting to be like, yo, man,
Oh,
you need to be
Paulo has
taking me into
entered the chat.
consideration that. Yeah.
Paulo has entered the chat. He has said, "Hey, where's my section?" You know what I mean? I think I mean as of today, again, way too early MVP votes. You would have to throw in Paulo. You'd have to throw in Jason Tatum. I think you'd have to look at Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, Luka Doncic. I think Paulo's very much, as of how the season started, he has to be in those conversations. And the scary thing, Paulo's not even 22.
Yeah, that's the scariest thing you've said so far.
He is not even 22. And when we generally talk about players that, that are winning championships or, like are reaching their pinnacle, we're normally talking about guys at 27, 28 years old. We're 6 years away from what that version of Paulo looks like. And if this is what we're getting now, Orlando's winning a title in the next 5 to 10 years. I'm sorry, they just are. Like, especially if they're playing to this level. So happy for Orlando. Glad they finally got a guy. And the best part is, he wants to be in Orlando. Like he wants to be a part of what they're building, which has not been the case with their stars of the past. So, just hope they can unlike in the past, I hope they can maximize this window because it seems like they got a pretty damn good one. Steve, before I let you go, I would be remiss if I did not ask you to name at least a couple of prospects that basketball fans should be keeping their eye on that are not named Cooper Flag, because I think that's the obvious one. He's probably going number one, going out on a limb. What are some guys people should be looking out for, Steve?
Well, if I can give my Cooper Flag spiel once, like I'm not gigantic fan, but I mean he's like kind of prospect. Like right now, the draft happened today. You be an idiot to not take anybody, not name or not just to take Cooper Flag. If you didn't take Cooper Flag, you're an idiot. He's super hard to comp to. Some people have tried Giannis. Don't do it. That doesn't work. I've heard like Anthony Davis, which might be closer. I think he's like a blend of guys where you're like, I don't know if he's going to be like the primary guy, but the reason why the Anthony Davis one is so close is like, think of AD on the Pelicans where you're like, oh yeah, defensive player of the year candidate, he can create, but like there always seemed to be kind of something missing along the way. Right.
Right.
So I think that's probably like the closest. I've thought about Jaren Jackson Jr. when I've thought of Cooper,
What
not to
about
say they're
Andre
the same.
Karolinko? I just saw
Yeah,
that.
that was another name I was going to bring up because he's a blend of a bunch of different guys where you're like, he has some point forward to him a little bit, but like defensively, he's like Jaren Jackson where like, I feel like he's just going to block shots like automatic and be defensive player of the year candidate, maybe even win one. And AK-47 is the other one I always think when I watch Cooper because of the level of activity and he always does connective stuff. Like even if his offense isn't going, just like AK-47 did, like he always did connective stuff. And again, defensive player of the year candidate. When like every one of the comps you could throw out as defensive player of the year candidate,
Yep.
part of the, again, defensive anchor, part of the reason why he's number one. Started shooting better, is a good passer, good athlete, hustle guy, great energy, all that stuff. Number two, obviously, is Ace Bailey. If you don't know Ace Bailey, there have been guys every single year that are like 6'8" or above that automatically can shoot, and everybody's like, oh, give him the Paul George comp. Like Brandon Miller, a couple of people try to give him the Paul George comp, and it's like Brandon Miller couldn't beat 80-year-old Paul George in a foot race or a jumping contest. Like Brandon Miller's just not that type of athlete, even though he's a good offensive hub and player. Whereas Ace Bailey, yes, this is the guy that you can actually start to think like, oh, give him the actual Paul George comp, because super athletic, fantastic jump shooter. I mean, at 6'9", he might be 6'10" too. We'll see where the measurements come in. Like
He's
there's
huge.
nobody that can block his shot. He can just get it off anywhere. The criticism on him is he doesn't attack the rim as much. He doesn't get enough foul pressure on it. But I mean, 6'10" jump shooter with that level of athleticism, and just in the few game tape we've seen from Rutgers, seems like cares about defense, and at that size, even if he's okay at it, like 6'9", 6'10" perimeter defender. Think like Jaden McDaniels. Part of the reason why people like kind of whiffed on him is they wanted him to be a primary creator, but as he transitioned into a role player, his length is part of the reason why he's so good today. I think Ace has much higher ceiling than that, though. Again, you can think of like the Paul George as a high end outcome where he's primary creator, maybe can be the number one scorer. For a Pistons team in particular, like there might be the chance, like a real 50-50 chance that at the end of it, if the Pistons get the first pick, that Ace Bailey is the better choice because of his creation ability. And, if you don't buy into Cooper being like the number one guy and you just want to lean into offense and you feel like you need another explosive scorer, Ace is the guy. And again, the whole thing of like, I just settles for jumpers. That's not a big deal when you have Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham, because if you just have a 6'10" sniper, like if he just turns into Michael Porter Jr., again, I don't know if that's worth the number one overall pick over a Cooper flag, but maybe Coop doesn't have the season that people predict. He's the only other guy, though, that has any chance of getting into it, just because, again, he could be a Paul George type of player. The other guys after that, number three is kind of wide open. Dylan Harper and Nolan Traore are probably number three for other people, but keeping it real, they cannot play with Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey, in my opinion. Like Dylan Harper needs the ball. He's kind of an old school player. A lot of people compare him to Cade at how he plays with pace. He's super strong, knows how to go to the rack, very good passer. And it's like, that's the one where I'm like, I don't see how in year 4 of Ivy and year 5 of Cade, you're like, okay, we're going to draft this rookie, number 3, and he's also going to get the ball. I just don't see it. Same with Nolan Traore, even more so. Like he's absolutely a hand and ball point guard that needs to it. And the shooting, I'm not as confident in it as other guys. So those are two that unfortunately I think like not really in the question. VJ Edgecombe would be the other guy going to play at Baylor this year. Super athletic. If you saw any of the FIBA and Olympic play this last season, this is a kid that's like 19, 20 years old playing for the Bahamas that had Buddy Hield, that had like 3 or 4 other players. VJ was the star of that team and scored just a ton of buckets. Yeah, he was the leading scorer, and everybody remarked of like, man, like I didn't know he was like that, but he's a mega athlete and really good defender. Think if Marcus Smart had an already really good picture perfect jump shot. Like that's the type of player that VJ Edgecombe is. And I mean, again, he's a really good athlete, fantastic leaper. If you want to go see him, dunk on just about everybody, go look up his YouTube highlights there. The main thing with him is like on ball stuff. People are like, I don't know how much of an on ball creator he is. I don't know how much of a passer he is. But again, for a Piston team, who cares? You don't need that stuff. Maybe he could be like supercharged Eric Gordon for this Piston team, where yes, he's probably like 6'3", 190, but I mean the wingspan looks good. Again, the athleticism is really tall. Another guy I think of is Lou Dort, like a super athletic version of Lou Dort who plays small forward for the Oklahoma City Thunder. Sam Vecini of the Game Theory podcast has said, imagine Case and Wallen with Jet. That's another fantastic one for me of like, yeah, all defense level guy with all world athleticism. Great. The other two, or the 3 for the Pistons that I think they can't pass up if they get 4 or their traditional number 5 overall pick. Con Knipple at Duke. Like he's a fantastic shooter, country strong, like 6'6", 6'7" guy. Like he's really a 3-level scorer too. He knows how to back guys down. The main thing he has though is a jumper that like just doesn't seem like it's ever going to miss. If you watched the Duke exhibition, like it's clear him and Cooper Flag already have this real good connection that Cooper's just going
Yeah.
to find him and feed him for threes. And really, I mean, like that's all you want after, the top guys is like, all right, let's find a shooter on the wing that can work. And again, I do think Concanipple has some like Clay Thompson, like possibility creation in his game. But the guy he kind of reminds me more of is Desmond Bain, where you're like, yeah, I see that he has on ball, like he's, this kind of bigger guy that you're like, I don't know about the athleticism, but then the more you watch him play, you're like, it's undeniable. And that jumper in the 3-point shot, you just can't pass it up, especially for the Pistons that need that wing shooter. And then the other shooter there's Liam McNeely, who will be playing over at UConn. He's like 6. Yeah, I've seen him listed 6'6", 6'8", somewhere in there. Again, another guy that just shoots the lights out. I think he does have some kind of on-ball creation ability. He's somebody I haven't like quite like put the comp on yet, because I'm like, I think he can create some. Again, I think the defense is okay, maybe more of like a help defender than like man to man. He definitely doesn't have the strength of a Con, and he doesn't do like the backing things down and a more creativity. But again, for the Pistons, if you want a wing shooter, like there's nobody better than Liam McNeely at number 3 and on down. And then the last guy, the dark horse, is Kaman Malawach, who's going to be at Duke as well. Like super raw young prospect. He's like 7'2", maybe like 220-ish, somewhere around there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Very instinctual shot blocker. I mean, he moves incredibly well for being 7'2". He's taken more and more threes, so he does seem to have that stretchability. I do not know if Duke is going to allow him to do that, but I could see him having a similar season to Derek Lively there, Duke, who was on and off the court, like started some, struggled at the beginning of the year, but then as the year went on, you're like, oh, this guy's a really good shot blocker, that even in a small amount of minutes, he's blocking a ton of shots. I do think that can be there for Kaman Malawach. And for Piston team, again, with the center position being in such limbo, the 7'2" guy that can pop threes, if that's a thing, definitely worth taking a chance on in the top 5.
For sure. It seems like just from, looking at mock drafts and just from where people are looking at like the top of this lottery, real quick, and then we'll wrap it up. It seems like a lot more of the top of the lottery this year is actually playing college basketball or is actually in the NCAA. It looks like to me, at the very least. Yes, I was going to ask, do you think this is finally NIL starting to play a role, and like players starting to, now that financial aspect is there, people being able to use that stage of the tournament? Do you think people are going to be able to tune into college basketball more, like myself, and look at guys you could potentially see playing in the league in the years to come?
I mean, yes and no. The main thing is like Igor Demin, who's at BYU, is a great example of this. He was in, I want to say, Real Madrid or one of the systems there in Europe, in European basketball, and then came over to BYU because they paid him, handsome sum. And they're also like, we'll make you the man. So that way you're not stuck on the bench in a European development, which I think
Yep.
is the bigger thing. Like Luka Doncic is the absolute 1000% exception. Normally these international draft prospects, when you see their stats, you're like, they're only played like 15 minutes, or like, oh, they're down here. Unless they really like get out ahead of it. Like Nolan Traore is a good one. Stan Katin, like way back when, got him and was like, okay, we'll make you the man. Victor Wembanyama, obviously, like everybody was falling over themselves to get Victor, and they created a whole new team for him because nobody else wanted to give up that development time. It's partially the money, but it is partially also like, hey, you don't have to wait overseas and just sit on the bench. We can actually pay you maybe better than what you're going to be paid there. And like in Igor Demin's case, we'll make you the man, so you don't have to do it. And that's more the beneficial thing about it now, is like, okay, we can pay the overseas guys. And for NBA scouts, they're like, I don't have to make that trip. We don't have to spare that expense. We can just, fly on down or drive on down to Utah. Or when they come and visit, maybe like a local team that they play and scout in person, which is the bigger thing.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, Steve, that excites me because college basketball has been really difficult for me to watch because of the fact that I tune in to see who are the stars of tomorrow, to see, like what they can look like in on an NBA court. And it really feels like the last time we truly had that was a Cade Cunningham. And so, looking forward to seeing how that evolves. But Steve, seriously, man, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the pod. We got to have you on more often. I always super enjoy the episodes that we have you on. But can you just remind people where they can check out your podcast and your draft coverage?
So you can check out Resball Pod on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. It's on YouTube Podcasts as well. Google Podcasts is no more. RIP. I do a weekly Piston Pod with Andy, aka Data Driven Piston Fan. Again, at D_Piston_fan. Go follow him. I'm at Resball Pod on all social media platforms, and then I do also host a kind of weekly, like with Jam Hines from No Ceilings. You can check out all of Jam's work at NoCeilingsNBA.com. My favorite NBA draft analyst. Jam does fantastic work. We do a draft show. Like, we try to do it every week, but being adults with schedules, it doesn't always line up.
Yep.
Our last pod we did on the draft was the Matt Penny special, where we highlighted a freshman coming in that's not a top 50 RSCI recruit and argued for them of like, hey, you should go check these guys out because I think they're actually going to have a role. Paul McNeil of NC State was Jam's pick. Definitely go check him out. I think he's going to get shine. He scored 71 points to set a North Carolina high school record there and coming over to NC State. And then my pick was Ja'Kai Howard, who's going to be playing at Auburn. I mean, mega athlete, did fantastic in the OTE last year for the City Reapers. So I'm sure Asar saw a lot of that stuff because he's a City Reaper alum as well. So check us out, Rest Ball Pod, or if you can get your podcasts.
Absolutely, Steve. Thank you so much again. Troy, thank you. And thank you for listening as well. Be sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel so you're not missing any more of the content. But that will do it for today, folks. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you guys next time from Half Court. Be sure you're subscribed.